Hi there, it's Jonathan here. This is 2450 and we're reading the book of Genesis in 24 days. Genesis 24 begins, Abraham was very old and the Lord had blessed him in every way. This is an important statement. From the beginning of God's call on Abram's life in Genesis 12:2, God promises to make him into a great nation and bless him. We can't get away from the importance of the concept of blessing in the book of Genesis. Creator creates creation. When creation remains in a right relationship with Creator, the result is blessing. There are still the echoes of the consequences of sin in life, but the pervading aroma of life in right relationship with Creator is blessing. Abraham is now very old and very blessed. Chapter 24 is a welcomed PG-rated love story in contrast to some of what we've read about in Genesis. Having said that, the oath in verse 2 that the senior servant takes is, let's say, a cultural practice that might not fly in the 21st century. When Abraham says, "Put your hand under my thigh," that is a polite way of saying, "Hold my genitals." Yes, a disturbing thought. But apparently the way some vows were taken. Abraham is saying to his servant, "The task I'm giving you will have direct consequences on the seed of my loins, on the generations promised to me by God. And so by my loins you will swear before God that you will find my son an appropriate wife." Isaac is grown up, having survived being almost sacrificed on the altar, and the servant has been charged with the challenge of finding him a wife from Abraham's homeland, a land that would be free of the influence of the Canaanites. From Hebron in the south to Haran in the northeast, you're looking at the distance of travelling from Sydney to the Gold Coast, about a 17-day camel ride one way. 24:6 speaks of the covenant God made with Abraham again. It's easy to get a little bored with this regular restating of the covenant God made with Abraham and think that the writer has forgotten we already know this stuff. Throughout Genesis, we're constantly reminded it is God who made the covenant, and the promise was to Abraham and his descendants. You'll notice throughout the Old Testament, it's often said the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, etc. He is the faithful God of every generation. You can bank every promise God ever gives. He has promised to take his people to the promised land. Remember, this is ultimately for every believer looking forward to new creation. Interestingly, this is the longest chapter in Genesis, and it is devoted to a story of marriage. Verse 14 is an encouragement to all of us who look for signs from the Lord. This is certainly an example of just that. Verse 21, a constant reminder as the servant looks for Isaac's wife-to-be that it is the Lord who will make his journey successful. Once direction to the right woman is given, the servant provides Rebekah with expensive gifts as a symbol of the abundant blessing resting upon Abraham from God, and then sets a good example for all of us in verse 27, declaring, "Praise be to the Lord. When God guides and provides, thanks and praise is given to him immediately." Verse 34 has the servant testifying to the story of God's goodness and provision. We too should be ready to testify to the reality of God's presence and power in our lives. Verse 45, even in this primitive setting, is a great reminder to be practicing the presence of God. The servant, whilst looking out for God's wife, for Isaac, is praying in his heart for guidance. Multiple times in this chapter, such as verse 52, we find the servant bowing and worshipping God, a constant attitude of praise while on God's mission. Verse 58, Rebekah bravely agrees to leave her home and head off in search of her promised husband. The patriarchs of Israel get a lot of press coverage in the Old Testament. It's worth stopping and acknowledging the immense courage of one of the matriarchs, a young woman like Rebekah. Living in a culture and time in history when her gender was enormously lacking power and autonomy, she trusted God and stepped out, leaving everything that was familiar to her save some attendants. The chapter ends like a good love story with man and woman running to each other in slow motion with a romantic soundtrack, falling in love. We're told verse 67, so she became his wife and he loved her. And that's the story of how Isaac met Rebekah. Enjoy God's word.